face of Middle East diplomacy in an unlikely but maybe fitting setting. Berlin was the site today of the first face-to-face meeting between Israeli Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi and his counterpart from the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan. This following the signing of the Abraham Accords. The two were hosted at a summit arranged by the German government, and the ministers also visited Berlin's Holocaust Memorial, where Ashkenazi told El Nahyan that he himself was the child of survivors. The Emirati minister then wrote in the memorial's guest book, "Never again." Later, the two held a joint press briefing. Here is some of that.
The relations between our countries are excellent, but we are worried about terrorism and the dangers that exist. The Emirates, together with Germany and Israel, have a common interest in the region to be stable. Today, we want to reiterate that there is new hope for Palestinians and Israelis so that they can work on a two-state solution and a better future for the region. Our common presence here today illustrates a new era: peace, stability, prosperity, hope. I would like to use this opportunity to call upon the Palestinians to come back to the negotiating table. Only through direct negotiations will we be able to find a solution to the conflict. There was a historic visit at the Holocaust Museum, the Shoah Museum, and it was very moving for me as a representative and former chief of staff of Israel and a son of Holocaust survivors. And we commemorated the victims, and for the first time in history, your representative, a foreign minister of an Arab state, was present. Together, we promised each other to never forget.
Well, I'm joined for more in studio by Owen Alterman, our senior international affairs correspondent. But first, let's go live to Berlin and our Germany correspondent, Paulina Garayev. And Paulina, Berlin has the honor of hosting this first face-to-face meeting between the Israeli and Emirati foreign ministers. Tell us a bit about what transpired today.
Well, this was definitely an historic day that started with Minister Ashkenazi arriving to Berlin on a military plane sent to help his arrival from Israel, that's right now dealing with the corona pandemic. He arrived here, and first on his agenda was an historic visit to the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. This was the first time that a senior Israeli minister and a senior minister from an Arab country visit together at Holocaust Memorial. This never happened before, and it was very appropriate for this act to be the act that opens this historic meeting, since as Minister Ashkenazi noted in the guest book at the memorial, this is really a sign that a new era is coming here in the Middle East. Afterwards, I continued to the official guest house of the German Foreign Ministry. You see this behind me, where they held a meeting between all three foreign ministers, followed by those statements that we heard earlier today, and of course a bilateral meeting between Minister Ashkenazi and his Emirati counterpart, where all the nitty-gritty aspects of establishing a relationship between the two countries were discussed.
Right, and no doubt in the coming months we're going to be seeing high-level visits by Israeli and Emirati officials, both in this country and in the UAE, but of course there's lots to be worked out ahead of that. But in the meantime, a meeting in Berlin, very strong symbolism, choosing that as the location.
That's right, Calev. The pictures were always expected to be stronger than the words, and the fact that this meeting happened, more important than what actually happened at the meeting, and there was no surprise in that was actually the case. Again, as Paulina mentioned, that visit to the Holocaust Memorial, not unusual, of course, for an Israeli foreign minister to be there with a German foreign minister, but of course very unusual and unprecedented to have an Arab foreign minister there as well. Very, very powerful. Again, the Emiratis sending yet another signal about just how far they want to go with this normalization, just how accepted they want to feel in Israel and in the Jewish world. Again, a very, very powerful way to do that here. Calev, I don't want to rain on the parade, but at least maybe a few tiny raindrops of drizzle. I would have liked to have heard more about that nitty-gritty. I would have liked to have heard more about the content of those agreements, particularly flights. Don't underestimate the flights.
Right.
Again, and the importance of people-to-people contact. Obviously not so relevant at the moment because of the pandemic, but when conditions allow to actually have that infrastructure be in place. But again, that is marginal to the main story, which is the fact that they were there together, all those pictures that we saw, extremely powerful.
Well, actually, let's go to Paulina. Owen would like some details. Are there any of that coming out of the meetings, Paulina, that you're hearing?
Well, we heard already from the minister speaking today that they're exploring opportunities when it comes to trade, energy, economic opportunities. It seems that the first thing on their agenda is signing a visa agreement, which means that once such agreement is signed, effective immediately, Israelis all around the world can just walk into an Emirati embassy and apply for a visa to visit, to just go there. In Israel, of course, this will take some time because first we need to establish an Emirati embassy in Israel. No word on whether that will be in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, of course. But this is something that will take some time for Israelis abroad. This process is expected to be expedited, and they could be already the first Israelis to visit the Emirates following such a court. This seems to be the news to come, or the first agreements to be signed. But they will be followed by many, many agreements that right now, in the bilateral meeting being held as we speak, are being discussed.
Right. And briefly, Paulina, how is this being covered in Germany, a country that always wants to play a role in Middle East peacemaking, but doesn't always agree with Israel, for example, on the Palestinian issue?
Of course, they see this as a way to, of course, promote the two-state solution, and Minister Mars made it clear that they're still committed to the two-state solution, and this is another step in that direction. Also, Minister Ashkenazi echoed the same sentiment, saying that we need the Palestinians to return to the negotiation table, and if we want this trend to continue, if we want to see other countries join these agreements and also normalize their ties with Israel, the Palestinians need to return to the process. Otherwise, this can become a barrier.
Right. Owen, this has been primarily Prime Minister Netanyahu's show with the UAE, almost a solo show. But here, a stage for Foreign Minister Ashkenazi to at least show that this is broadening out, now involving more of the government.
You're absolutely right. A really interesting aspect of this. Germany and the UAE, we certainly see, take their foreign ministries seriously. And it's good to see Israel's foreign minister be able to be there, stepping up to the plate. But you're absolutely right. Look, at the end of the day, and Paulina was getting at this, there have to be agreements that have to be negotiated, and it's really up to the Israeli foreign ministry to be able to do that. So there's an important role for Ashkenazi to play in that. Also, of course, impossible to see Prime Minister Netanyahu being able to travel from Israel at this point unless there's something exceedingly dramatic just because of the conditions of the pandemic. Calev, one other point very briefly, just how important it is for the Emiratis to be seen as tolerant. You ask what's in it for them in this normalization. There's a lot of talk about Iran. It's obviously important. A lot of talk about the economic opportunities, obviously important. But don't lose sight of how important it is for them to burnish their brand and their soft power as being tolerant. And if you're an Arab government and you want to show how serious you are about tolerance, then you do what the Emiratis did. You take the ultimate step and normalize with Israel and go as far as they've done. Political scientists call it a costly signal, and it's a signal that they are paying the cost to do because they want that reward of having their image be that of tolerance in Germany and U.S. and throughout the West.
Well, certainly Berlin has hosted some tragic episodes in Jewish history. It's nice to see quite a positive one. Today, Owen Alterman and Paulina Garayev in Berlin, thank you for that.